5 Live Formula One.
Last time out in Baku, we had qualifying chaos, a Piastri Lap 1 crash, and Max Verstappen's second win in as many races. You may say it's nicely set up then for this weekend's Singapore Grand Prix. I'm Eleanor Oldroyd, and delighted to say that joining me from the Singapore paddock is BBC F1 reporter Jenny Gao and correspondent Andrew Benson. So what's it like in Singapore? I gather it's pretty toasty.
Yes, you can say that again. Hello, Ellie. It's nice to see you and hear from you. Yes, it's always toasty here in Singapore, about 31 degrees Celsius. It rained a lot, though, today. We had a sudden downpour, thunder, lightning. Now it's dry. It's dark, of course, because this is the original F1 night race. But, yeah, I think it's safe to say it's rather humid.
Yeah, and this is going to have an effect, isn't it, Andrew? Because for the first time, F1's governing body has declared the Grand Prix a heat hazard race.
Yes, it's a new thing for this year, Ellie, a new rule. And what it means is that the drivers have the option to wear a cool suit in the race, or a cool vest, I should say. They don't have to wear it this year, although they will do next year. It'll become mandatory in 2026. But if they don't wear it, and the teams have to sort of ballast up their cars by 500 grams to compensate, so there's no competitive advantage from not doing that. It seems like most of the drivers are at least going to try it in practice. This is the most demanding race on the calendar. It's 2 hours long. The humidity has been 80% here today, 30 degrees or just over as well. So you can imagine what it's like being in a Formula One cockpit for 2 hours around a bumpy street circuit in a cockpit which can be anywhere between 40 and 60 degrees Celsius inside. So very, very tough environment for the drivers.
Yeah, and speaking to George Russell today, he was actually explaining what it's like. He's trialled this vest in events coming and prior to Singapore. And he was saying it can be uncomfortable, and that's one of the problems that they're finding with this suit. And it very much depends on the car that you are in and how comfortable you feel. But it's not a high G-force circuit, so I think he was explaining earlier that actually it shouldn't be too painful, but that is a consideration and a concern for some of the drivers.
Yeah, it's basically, Ellie, if you can imagine it, it's kind of like instead of the fireproof underwear that they would normally use, they wear this different fireproof underwear which is slightly thicker, which obviously is a heat issue itself, with a kind of tube running through it, and that tube is linked to a system in the car which has a pump and a sort of cooling device, which some of them use actually ice. It's located in different parts of the car for different teams. Some of them have it in the nose box, some of them have it beside the driver, some of them have it in a crash structure which is just outside the chassis, but in the sort of vicinity of the driver, and that liquid goes around the car, through the driver's vest and out again. And of course one of the difficulties is when it's so hot, is trying to keep that liquid cold enough through the race for that length of time for it to stay cold, because it might actually not be cold at all before too long. For example, Carlos Sainz, the Williams driver, was saying he tried it in Jeddah at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in April, and it only lasted for 15 minutes or so. They've worked on the system since then, obviously. So it's been triggered by the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix, when the conditions were not dissimilar to this. Qatar was held a little bit earlier in the year than it was this year, than it's going to be this year. And some of the drivers, one driver vomited in his helmet there. One driver had to withdraw from the race because he couldn't cope with the heat anymore, and a number of them had to be treated by doctors afterwards because of the difficulty of the conditions.
Sounds pretty brutal for the drivers. Hopefully you're going to have nice cool conditions to work in. You guys were commentating on the race. I mean, as you said, Jenny, this is the original night race in F1 going back to 2008. What are your best memories of this circuit?
I love this place, Ellie. It has to be said. I've been coming here for years now, and it never fails to disappoint. The paddock is actually right underneath the Singapore Flyer, which is a little bit like the London Eye, but it's here, and it's all lit up at the moment in purple. It's just a glorious place to come. The people are lovely, the food's great, the racing's normally interesting. Qualifying is always dramatic. But I think if I look back at the memories I've got from here, I think I'd go back to 2018, where Lewis Hamilton just made the perfect pole position lap. He just strung it all together. It was magical. And for me, watching him perform that way on this circuit, which is really tough, as we've spoken about, very demanding, it was just a real mark of his absolute talent.
It was indeed, and then there was another lap the year after, wasn't there, Jenny, by Charles Leclerc, who, it was a very different kind of lap. It was much more violent. It almost looked like he was making mistakes. The car was sliding everywhere, but that it in itself was just as impressive a lap from him as Hamilton's had been the year before. It's a circuit that really separates out the really good quality drivers. It looks, if you look at the layout of it, it just looks like a bunch of right angle corners joined by straights, but it's bumpy and the walls are close, and so in those conditions the best drivers really do shine, because you've really got to take things out to the sort of finest millimeters in terms of driving judgment, sliding through the corners. Any mistake is punished very severely, just as, for example, Oscar Piastri, the championship leader, found out in Baku 2 weeks ago. Baku's another street circuit, but nowhere near as demanding as this one.
Let's remind everyone of the championship standings, because it's still Piastri leading ahead of Norris, Verstappen closing that gap a little bit, but McLaren could go on and win the Constructors' Championship this weekend.
Yes, they almost certainly will do. In fact, they could have done it in Baku, but their weekend went a bit badly wrong over there. But here, it's even more difficult for them to not do it, if you see what I mean. I can't imagine a set of circumstances where they won't. So I think we can pretty much lock that one in. The drivers it's almost certainly still going to be between Piastri and Norris, but the last two wins by Max Verstappen in Monza and Baku have sort of just prized open a little chink of light for the Red Bull driver. And Verstappen being Verstappen, he's so impressive, so consistent. Basically everybody in this paddock knows he's the best driver. So there's a little bit of extra pressure on the McLaren drivers from him, even though he's still 69 points behind Piastri with 7 races to go, which is a big gap to make up with 25 points for a win.
But it's worth pointing out, isn't it, Andrew and Ellie, that Max Verstappen has won everywhere, all the current circuits he's won at, apart from this one. He's never had pole here, and he's never won here. And I just wonder if that works into the maths and the stats and the predictions.
Well, if you were a Formula One driver, Jenny, you would say that stats like that are there to be broken, and I'm sure that's Verstappen's mindset. It's not. Jenny's absolutely right, though. It's not a track that's generally suited the Red Bull car, and it's still not expected to. Having said that, Monza 2 races ago was also a track that they've not gone that well on in the past. A couple of years ago here, Verstappen had a really terrible race weekend. I think he finished 7th or 8th or something. That was in the year that he won 19 of 23 races. That was the only race all year that Red Bull didn't win. But just goes to show the power of him and Red Bull as a team, that they came back here 1 year later last year and he finished 2nd. He was a long way back from Lando Norris, who won. But if they can go from 8th to 2nd in 1 year, then I wouldn't rule anything out for this season.
Well, let's focus on McLaren for the next few minutes, because, as you say, Andrew, still overwhelming favourites to take the Drivers' Championship as well, with Piastri at 25 points clear of Norris, and then Verstappen 255 points. So that is, 44 points behind, I think, my terrible maths. But they need to put a bad weekend in Baku behind them, Jen, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It was so out of character, actually, for McLaren. They've got everything almost to perfection. But actually, in Baku, it just all went a bit wrong, especially for Oscar Piastri, who has been so solid, so reliable. It's Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc in their red just walked past us, the 2 Ferrari drivers, mobbed by a load of fans. And it's quite late here for fans to still be here, but they've stayed and kept their eye out for the 2 drivers. Sorry, I digress. But yes, the McLarens didn't go well. Piastri didn't go well. It was very out of character. We'll hear from him in a moment, I'm sure. But this track, it suits them better. So I'm not expecting any repeat of the form in Baku. Andrew Benson is just raising his eyebrow. I'm not predicting any of the same incidents. Andrew, are you?
I wouldn't predict those sorts of incidents, no, but because it was so out of character for Oscar Piastri, as you say, he's been the epitome of solidity this year. And he was talking in the news conference. I've just come from there straight to here, actually, Jenny, about the lessons that he's had from that. So I think he's a sort of driver, McLaren have been saying repeatedly this year, who learns very quickly from situations, and we've seen that in the step up in his performance from last year to this. You would never have imagined after last season, when Norris was the dominant McLaren driver, that Piastri would have had the season that he's having this year. So I think you're absolutely right. In that context, Jenny, it would be very surprising if Piastri had another weekend that was like Baku here.
Well, let's hear from the championship leader right now, Oscar Piastri, on his disastrous weekend.
Obviously, I don't want to repeat what happened in Baku, but mistakes are going to happen. I'm only human at the end of the day, so it's going to happen. You know, obviously I don't want to make those again, but I think they are going to happen no matter what they look like, and just trying to make sure that you move on from them is the most important thing, and learn from them. You know, it doesn't really matter if it's missing an apex or locking up, jumping a start, whatever. It's kind of how you learn from it and move on. That's the important part. So I feel like I've been able to do that in the week off and ready to go again.
When it comes to that, would you say that it was just a blip? I hear some people talking about pressure and that the pressure's getting to you. I'm not sure I buy it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think qualifying was trying to push a little bit too hard. It happens. And I think the race, I would say probably the crash was somewhat related to the start. It's never easy to shake off a start like that in such a short time. So, there's a lot of learning from that, but silly mistakes more than anything else. I don't feel like I need to change how I'm approaching things or anything like that. There's been some good lessons from it, definitely, but some of those lessons have been that what I've been doing so far has been working pretty good.
Well, that was Oscar Piastri. And Jenny, you asked him there about the pressure, about whether it's getting to him a little bit. And he said, no, it's all fine. But it has to be, surely, to be in this position at this stage of the season, he's got to be feeling it.
Do you know what? I don't think so. He's so cool and calm. And I know I'm not the sort of person that everyone agrees with most of the time, especially on this. Up and down the paddock, a lot of people are saying, yes, it's a stress, it's the nerves, it's a big championship. This is, his first championship battle he's going for. But actually, I don't buy it. For me, it wasn't stress. It was just a bad weekend. And he's only human, as he says himself. And I just think it was one of those blips. He's learned a lot from it. But actually, I just don't think it's about the pressure. I don't believe he feels that pressure, because he knows he's in a winning position at the minute.
I don't know, Jenny, and only he knows deep down, Oscar Piastri, what actually went wrong. But if he crashed in practice, he crashed in qualifying, he jumped the start, and then he crashed on the first lap of the race. It's a pretty bad weekend, as you say, and something must have caused it. I think what was happening in qualifying was that it was a weekend where he was not on Norris's pace. He was finding it much more difficult in the car than Norris was. They were both finding the McLaren quite tricky, actually, because Norris himself only qualified 7th in Baku. One of the things he said in the news conference that I was at was he was talking about risk. He didn't expand on it. What he meant was he was taking too many risks, basically, in Baku. And I think he was taking those risks because he was trying to stretch for something that wasn't there, basically. Now, whether that was because Norris looked a little bit more comfortable in the car than him there, or whether it was just his own self wanting to do what he felt was possible, but for some reason he was feeling he wasn't quite getting it, I don't know, and we won't ever know. But we do know that he made those mistakes, and we do now know that he's capable of making those mistakes, as all drivers are. And I think this is the thing about Formula One. It puts people under so much pressure. It tests them to the absolute extreme. It's fascinating to watch how people deal with this sort of situation and how they then progress.
And particularly because he's got his teammate breathing down his neck, Andrew, hasn't he? Because Lando Norris, as we say, closing the gap to 25 points, and he won at this circuit last year.
He did. Now, 25 points is still a big margin. It's a whole race win, but it's come down in the last couple of races. Obviously, Norris had a big blow at the Dutch Grand Prix where he retired with an engine problem. Then Norris beat him in both Italy and Azerbaijan. So that's come down to 25 points. It's still enough for him to stay calm, It's still enough for him to not have to overreach in the way that he seemed to be doing in Baku. And I don't think he will worry too much about the fact that Norris was so dominant here in Singapore last year, because Norris was dominant generally last year, and he hasn't been dominant this year. In fact, the stats are all in Piastri's favour over the season as an average. Just the last couple of races, they haven't been. So I think he'll be determined, Piastri, to turn that around and say and send a message to say, no, I'm still in control of this championship. This is mine, and you're not going to get it off me, even though you might think you are going to at the moment.
Absolutely agree. And every time Piastri has faced some sort of hurdle, think back to the first race, the opening race in Australia, where he spun out of the race and finished 9th, actually, in the end. But that was a measure of the man when he came back in China and won. So I expect him to come back even harder and fight even more and show Norris that actually as Andrew said, I'm still number one. Don't tamper with my lead.
Lando Norris has been upping his performance, though, hasn't he? I mean, he retired in Zandvoort, but he's got 9 points on Oscar Piastri in the last 2 races. So, maybe, but he missed an opportunity. Maybe he could have taken more advantage in Baku, Jen.
Should have been more, shouldn't it? Absolutely.
I think it should, and he was. He said he couldn't have done any better in that qualifying lap, which put him 7th on the grid, and that defined his race because overtaking was so difficult there. But other drivers in cars that were actually slower than the McLaren did do better than him at more or less the same time. So I don't think that's a justifiable excuse. Having said that, coming into this weekend in Singapore, this is the type of circuit that Norris excels on. He's very good in the slow speed corners. He's good on street circuits. He won in Monaco, let's not forget. So although Piastri will be determined, as we were saying, to put everything that happened in Baku behind him, I think if you were to pick a favourite going into the weekend, you'd probably pick Norris. And from an objective observer's point of view, of course, we need Norris to win, really, because the gap could do with going down still rather than going up again.
Well, let's hear now from Lando Norris, and particularly the threat from a bit of a resurgent Max Verstappen.
I mean, it would be easier if I was always finishing first and him third, but that's not going to be the case. So I think certainly in Baku we had the pace to win and we had the car to win, and we didn't. I don't think we necessarily had maybe the pace to be on pole, but I think we had a chance to fight and had the chance to fight Max. Monza, they were just too quick for us. So if there's some races coming up where they're just too fast, which is very possible, he qualified 1/10 behind me here last year. Even when we were already dominant, he's only 1/10 off. So I expect them to be quick for many of the races this season. We're going to go to Vegas, another low downforce track where we don't expect to be as great as we have been in other places. So I think there's still opportunity. We know there's opportunity for them, but as long as we're just focusing on ourselves, and I'll try and maximise every result I can, whether that's on Saturday or Sunday.
Well, we're just hearing from Lando Norris there, Jenny, on Max Verstappen and the increasing threat that he's offering. So could that be a case that McLaren are going to have to think about prioritising a driver in this race?
I do not believe so in the slightest. McLaren do McLaren things. Red Bull, especially Max Verstappen, do Verstappen things. So even if Verstappen, at a circuit he's never won at, I remind you, could push and get that win, I still think McLaren will do what they do best, which is let their drivers go for it entirely and they battle it out on track.
I actually asked Oscar Piastri about this in an interview I did with him at Monaco, actually. We were discussing this freedom to race situation at McLaren. I said, are you not worried that you could end up leaving the door open for Verstappen to come through the middle of you? And he said, yes, that's a possibility. But we both agreed that we want to have our own best opportunity to win the championship. And the team are facilitating that at the moment. And the team are absolutely committed to this policy of being as equal as being as fair as they can with each of their 2 drivers. I mean, we've seen them, manipulate a race a couple of races ago in Monza because they thought that Norris's slow pit stop wasn't fair to him as a driver, and they asked Piastri to let him back through again after that slow pit stop enabled him to get ahead, which he hadn't been all race. So I think that demonstrates their commitment to fairness. I think you can have arguments and debates about whether that was the right decision as a team to make. Lots of people in Formula 1 think that it wasn't, but that's the way they're going about it. Andrea Stella, the team principal, is very clear about what he considers to be fair and equitable, and he's been absolutely steadfast in holding that line, and I don't see any possibility of that changing, even with this still distant threat from Verstappen. But McLaren, have never felt that the threat from Verstappen had gone away, so they don't see any reason why the rest of us now perceiving him to be more dangerous to them should change their approach.
Well, we've spoken about McLaren and the threat of Max Verstappen in his Red Bull, but what's behind their turnaround, Andrew?
Well, it's a combination of things, Ellie. They've introduced a new floor at the Italian Grand Prix, and that's helped them run the car in a better way. That sounds a bit trite, but basically, one of the most interesting things was something that Verstappen said after the Italian Grand Prix. He was talking about the effect that new team principal Laurent Mekies has had since he was promoted from the Racing Bulls team after Red Bull sacked Christian Horner following the British Grand Prix. And he was talking about Mekies asking the engineers the right questions. And before that, they were sort of flip-flopping from one extreme setup to another, trying to find the right way to run the car. And with this new sort of I guess you'd call it a more considered approach, more maybe engineering-based approach from the very top of the team. It seems like it's focused the engineering team, and it's led them down to a situation where they're now, in combination with this new floor, of course the airflow around Formula 1 cars is all important. It's enabled them to get the car in a place where Verstappen's much happier with the balance. And that's how the car feels as he's going through the corners. And that's enabled him to push it harder, and therefore the car's gone faster, they're more competitive, and now they're winning races. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, let's hear from Max Verstappen.
It's a big gap, but for me I just see it race by race. I try to do the best I can, and I know that if the car is capable of winning, we will win the race. So it's as simple as that, but at the same time, if we're not able to win the race, then that's it as well. So I'm not really too worried or stressed about anything.
This is the bogey track. You've already said it. You've unfinished business here, the only track on the current list that you haven't won at. So how do you turn around that fortune? Do you think there's something there that you've missed so far, or tell me?
Well, I think just in general, we've never really been that good here with the car. So then there are always places where, it's a bit more difficult to win. I hope this year will be better. I mean, last year we were second, but we were quite far from first. So we definitely need to try and be more competitive. But it's difficult to say at the moment, of course, how competitive we are going to be.
So Verstappen talking there, Jenny, about this particular circuit and this particular race, and there's definitely an element, isn't there, of, as he says, unfinished business.
Well, let's look at Max's form. 2 wins on the trot in F1, and then factor in that on his weekend off last week, he didn't chill out anywhere. He went to the Nürburgring and competed in a GT3 car and, with his teammate, won. So when it comes to winning, here's your man.
Yeah, and let's not underestimate what he achieved there. The Nürburgring that Jenny's talking about is the Nürburgring Nordschleife. It's the most famous circuit probably in the world. It's the most demanding racetrack that was ever created. It's 14 miles long, 180 something corners. They used to race Formula 1 there, but they ended in 1976 after Niki Lauda's famous fiery accident because it was just too dangerous. It's the first time Verstappen had raced there, and people take racing at the Nürburgring Nordschleife so seriously that even Max Verstappen had to go through a qualification process a couple of weeks ago to prove that he was capable of racing on it. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, really, if you look at it from the outside, but he's a humble guy, Max. Despite his 4 world championships, he went through the process uncomplainingly. It involved him driving an underpowered Porsche Cayman, believe it or not, just to prove that he wasn't going to be a danger to himself and anybody else. But yeah, he got to the race last weekend, the first time he'd raced there, as I said, and he absolutely smashed it. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise in a way because he's the greatest driver on the planet at the moment, possibly the greatest driver of all time, some people would say. But even so, it's still quite an achievement. And it just speaks to not only his talent, but also his enthusiasm, deep-seated enthusiasm for motorsport.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you get it past your partner, though. You say, no, I'm not going to change any nappies this weekend. I'm going to go off and do some more motor racing instead. But you talk about the respect that the other drivers have for Max Verstappen, Jenny, and there's a piece on the BBC Sport website now saying, is there a way that Max Verstappen can win the championship this year? And that was the question that was being asked in the press conferences today.
Yeah, 69 points is the way he can win it, to put it bluntly. But actually, as you say, all the drivers were asked, can you rate the percentage of chance that Max has to win this championship? And George Russell was commenting very kind of tongue-in-cheek, but he said 100%.
But he was winding up Lando Norris, who was sitting right beside him at the time.
Exactly.
Charles Leclerc was a bit more realistic when he said 20%, I think. It's a big ask. 69 points. There's 25 points for a win, as I say, 7 races remaining, plus 3 sprints, for which there are 8 points if you win. So he's got to basically close on Piastri by 10 points on average a race. So it's basically like saying he's got to keep winning and Piastri's got to keep losing for the rest of the season, more or less. And because of that, it's extremely unlikely. Having said that, bigger gaps have been closed in the past, just not very often.
So, Andrew, is there anybody who can stop McLaren taking the Constructors' Championship this weekend?
Well, it could, in theory, happen, but it's so unlikely. They don't even need to score any points. They just need to not be outscored by Mercedes by 31 points or Ferrari by 35 points. So that gives you an idea when there's 25 points for a win. Mercedes are basically going to have to win the race and score with their other car, and McLaren not score at all for McLaren not to win the Constructors' Championship. So that's how much of a gimme it is for them this weekend. So it's almost inconceivable that they won't be world champions by the end of this weekend.
And just some thoughts for Lewis Hamilton this week, Jenny, because he announced on social media that his beloved dog Roscoe died earlier in this week. So I'm sure that racing and being with people will help, but it's an awful feeling, isn't it? And we can't underestimate how emotional it's been for him.
Yeah, and obviously he took to social media and explained what had happened. He was out there in America with Roscoe and had to make that horrible decision that pet owners across the land would have had to make, that it's time. And to make that decision, he didn't have to do it with the other dog, Coco, so this is his first experience, and it has been utterly heartbreaking for him. But this paddock is an amazing place when something bad happens. And a lot of people say, oh, it's only a dog. But dog owners will understand. It really hurts. Pet owners in general, I suppose. And he's around his friends and family now here in the paddock. And I think everyone has gone out of their way. Certainly I saw a fan on the way into the track with a picture of Roscoe saying, we'll never forget him. And I think it's just a measure of what this place is like when bad things happen.
Okay, we're going to wrap up with some predictions. I mean, you've said it's going to be really, really hot. It could be really, really rainy. So you're the experts. Who's going to win? Andrew Benson.
Well, last night Jenny and I were at an event and I said Piastri, but I've been rethinking that this week since then. And I'm actually thinking it's going to be Norris.
I'm sticking with Piastri, who I did go for last night as well. I just think he's going to come back and put his sign up and say, this is my championship this weekend.
Many thanks to Jenny and Andrew for the last half hour or so. You can hear the Singapore Grand Prix on Sports Extra on Sunday with lights out at 1 p.m. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.